Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. Good morning and afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Taking Control of Microsoft 365 Data with Nuix, and welcome. Alex Chatzistamatis is your presenter today, and together with myself, we are so happy to have you here. Before we get started, I'll just cover a few housekeeping items. First, we encourage you to ask questions as we go along in the presentation. Use the Ask a Question tab located below the video player, and we'll do our best to answer during the Q&A portion or even as we go along. At the end of the webinar, please take a moment to rate the presentation and provide feedback. And you can use the Rate This tab below the player as well. And finally, the recorded version of this presentation will be available at the same URL you're at right now so that you can watch it again and share with your friends and colleagues. So with that out of the way, I'll take a moment to introduce myself. I'm Dana Feeney. I'm part of the Nuix marketing team, and I've been part of the overall Nuix team for about 6 years. Many aspects of my job as a marketer involve telling compelling stories to the markets we serve. And so helping Alex tell this story feels very appropriate kind of for this moment in time, especially. Nuix introduced our Microsoft connectors in February of 2020. And not long after that, basically in that moment, it felt prescient, especially given global events. The Nuix Microsoft connectors provide a single direct collection platform for OneDrive, SharePoint, Exchange, and Teams, apps that for many people who are joining us today, and Nuix included, have become transformative, synergistic, indispensable, but also hulking data monsters that contain discoverable, litigation-applicable data and custodians. All kinds of data that we need to get at. So Alex is going to talk with us today about the M365 challenges that he commonly encounters while working with customers and give a look at how you can collect exactly what you need across all Microsoft apps and quickly hook into search and review with Nuix, powered by the powerful processing power, and I said power a lot there, power of Nuix. So I'll hand off to Alex now. Hi, Alex. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Dana, and yourself?
I am well, other than all more power there. If you don't know Alex Chatz, which you may already from viewing our webinars, he's a blog author. He contributes a ton of great info and thought leadership to Nuix. He's a Nuix long-timer, and in his role as Senior Principal Enterprise Architect for clients in the corporate space, he helps solve complex customer challenges in information governance, email archives, unstructured data lakes, and cloud technologies. So there's your intro, Alex. I'll hand it to you.
Well, thank you, Dana. It's
Sure.
going to be hard to top that introduction. Well, thanks for joining us, folks. Look, without any further ado, I'd like to just jump right into it and start talking about Microsoft 365 data. And as Dana alluded to, really talking about some of the challenges that I have seen firsthand. All of my clients and customers talk about and bring up over the course of the last, and it spans really even before the last year, within the last few years. And we'll look at how Nuix can help solve these problems. Before jumping into it, for those of you on the line today that maybe aren't familiar with Nuix, or perhaps you do use Nuix and maybe you're solving one specific use case, Nuix can really help in a multitude of ways. And I think it goes without saying that Nuix is a leader in investigative analytics and intelligence at scale. We're a forensic level software solution. We're used by over 2,000 clients globally, and we are used to help solve many of the world's most complex data challenges. So you can see a few of those there between, legal cases and insider threat use cases, uncovering fraud or catching criminals. The Nuix ecosystem really contains a powerful data processing engine which looks at the ones and zeros of unstructured, semi-structured, and structured data very quickly. And of course, today we'll be looking at that from the Microsoft 365 perspective. It was invented by a bunch of awesome data scientists who really understood that, explosive growth in unstructured data back 20 years ago was something that was going to happen. And of course, not many tools would be able to, to compete and sustain with that. And so, it was really built by people with mission and purpose. And I'm very proud to demonstrate today the types of ways that it can help solve the Microsoft 365 data challenges that we're all, aware of. And so one of the things I'm going to talk about today is the data sources, right? And Microsoft 365 is one of them, but it's good to know that Microsoft really addresses, again, that spectrum of unstructured, structured, and semi-structured data. And by taking all of these data sources and funneling them through to the Nuix ecosystem, again, there's various different things you can do really from end to end when it comes to endpoint threat detection and response, to disk imaging and data collections, normalizing and ingesting all that data and normalizing it across thousands of different file types, being able to collaborate efficiently with both technical and business users within an organization, and then ultimately being able to present that data in a meaningful way, regardless if it's for litigation or an investigative report or an InfoGov exercise. Again, various different ways to present that data. And of course, from a deployment perspective, many of the organizations across the world that use Nuix are leveraging it on premises, in the cloud, perhaps our SaaS offering, or even a hybrid approach when it comes to a combination of those things. And again, sort of leveraging those different components of the Nuix ecosystem, you can solve eDiscovery, forensic and incident response challenges, insider threats, risk and compliance, and even being able to scale up and be leveraged as part of data warehouse, exercises to really sort of navigate the murky waters of various disparate and large data sets. And of course, who benefits from that? So, internally within organizations, general counsel, heads of investigation, IT directors, the CISO, all of these folks may either directly or indirectly be impacted by the capabilities of our Nuix technology. And of course, going beyond the box is also part of the pedigree of Nuix. Leveraging APIs and SDKs, Nuix can be used to enrich data, pump into analytics platforms, other reporting tools, data translate, audio and video transcriptions, etc. So lots of different ways where data can flow out of Nuix or back into Nuix based on things that have gotten enriched. And back to the statement I made before, who ultimately benefits from that? It's not just the people, the business users within organizations, but when you look at it holistically, law firms, government agencies, law enforcement, corporations, advisories, and service providers are all benefiting from the technology that Nuix brings to market. So it's really great stuff. I love the technology. And of course, today, really the purpose here is to take a look at this technology and how exactly can it help you with your Microsoft 365 data challenges. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Dana for a moment, who's just going to help set the stage here a little bit and really give us an idea of the scale and the depth and breadth of Microsoft 365.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so I do want to kind of give some context before Alex talks about some of those more the specific challenges and what Nuix can do to help, and go into that demo so that you're walking into that with some sense of really the magnitude of Microsoft 365 in organizations across the world. So first, there are over 1 million companies using Microsoft 365 worldwide, with a little more than half of those companies, about 600,000 in the United States. If we kind of scope down a bit more, about 70% of Fortune 500 companies reported purchasing Microsoft 365 in a 12-month period from April 2019 to April 2020. And I will note here that in mid spring of last year, Microsoft went from Office 365 to Microsoft 365 as their branding. So when we talk about Office 365 or Microsoft 365, it's the same product. They just went with more streamlined branding. And so with that, just that's a side note. And then prior to that, it was reported that 90% of Fortune 100 companies use Microsoft 365 prior to that reporting. So in around, I think it was like about summer of 2019. So to add a little more context to that. As far as Teams, we've seen the number of users for Teams skyrocket over the past year. We're talking 20 million in 2019, in November of 2019, kind of exploding to 115 million less than a year later, so as of October of 2020. And that's according to a recent Microsoft earnings call. And we know too well that the pandemic we're still living through has kind of rippled through our workplace tools and our protocols. And so for many organizations who are already using Microsoft, standing up Teams became a priority. Anecdotally, we had this experience at Nuix. We sort of had an incremental plan to integrate Microsoft 365 into our everyday use, and then pandemic hit. And we were basically forced to stand it up in, I think it was a week, 2 weeks. And so, that became part of our everyday tasks and communications. And so then given that data point, it's really no surprise that there was a 40% increase in Teams usage in March 2020 alone due to COVID. And so that kind of sets that stage a little bit. And I kind of wanted to stop here, Alex. I know you're going to talk about customer challenges. Those numbers in mind, was that proven out with your experiences working in the field with customers? Do you see those numbers kind of proving out in your experiences?
Oh, absolutely. And it's actually interesting. I was kind of sitting back and looking at some of those numbers and listening to what you were saying. And, even before the pandemic, just the Teams nature of Microsoft 365 was a real challenge for organizations. And, I was in meeting after meeting with customers where everyone sort of unanimously was telling me, we have to solve this Teams problem. There's a lot of it. The way the data is presented, the way we're sort of interacting with the native tools. We'd like to be able to leverage that and sort of overlay it with all of the other data sources. So it became pretty apparent. And so, when we first started on this journey building the connector, the Teams aspect of it was actually the biggest priority. Let's give our customers a way to leverage the Microsoft Graph API and to be able to download and use that Teams data in a meaningful way. And so that was really kind of the catalyst of it. And then we started bolting on the other components for Exchange and SharePoint and OneDrive around that. All right. So, with that, I'm just kind of going on to diving a little deeper into those challenges. The three common ones I typically hear about. First is, accurate and defensible search results. Just this week alone, I've spoken to a few clients who've come to Nuix and looking at the Microsoft 365 connector as a viable option and alternative to their current workflows. They've had several situations where being able to search and work with that data within the native tools isn't ideal for their SLAs and their business. And so they've known historically that Nuix has been a staple in the industry when it comes to being able to do very detailed and granular search across all different data sets. And of course now we'll talk about how that works with the 365 connector shortly. The other one is data sources beyond just what's available in Microsoft 365. Nuix at its core supports over 1,000 different file types out of the box without any third-party APIs required. And so being able to basically, overlay different data sets and search across all of those, again, we'll talk about that in a few moments, but it's really powerful when you can think about how you can take that 365 experience to the next level. And then, of course, the Teams data, as I mentioned before, as Dana sort of brought that question up, as of October 2020, over 115 million daily users of it. It's a constant struggle. Some of the folks using different licensing in their native tools, are limited to the extent of what they're able to do within the platform around Teams data. And so again, just being able to take that, consume that, make that a part of your typical unstructured data use case problem solving, bringing that in within the Nuix ecosystem across all the different data sources, and being able to make fact-based decisions as it comes to your problems that you're trying to solve. And so you've heard me talk about this a few times already, but how do we actually solve it? Well, like most of you who are familiar with Nuix, you'll know that we basically target data in place. And so the 365 connector really is no different, right? We've built the connector to leverage Microsoft's official Graph API. And the way Nuix approaches it is basically to do direct source capture. So using the wonderful connector that our engineering teams have built, Nuix is able to connect to your Microsoft tenant, of course, with credentials and authentication schemes that would be done prior. Nuix is able to connect to the tenant and effectively target a couple different key data sources. Of course, one of them being Exchange. So you'll be able to hit mailboxes and online archives, including recoverable items, and really any other part of the mailbox that you might need in order to address the challenges that you may have in front of you. Then, of course, there's SharePoint and OneDrive for Business. The Graph API that we're using for the connector allows Nuix to connect to SharePoint and OneDrive for Business, and again, download that data directly into a Nuix case. And actually, in the latest Nuix version, Nuix 9.0, which just released earlier this week, we've made some enhancements to the connector, and two things that we've included, which we're really proud of. One is basically versioning. So our users leveraging the connector can obtain multiple versions of a document that might be relevant that they're as part of their investigation. So that's pretty key. And so I'll show that through the demo. And also modern attachments. This is actually a bit of a differentiator in the sense that Exchange emails. Of course, many of you know when you send an attachment now, you can simply refer to the document that exists, in SharePoint or OneDrive for Business. So you can simply just pass a link to it. Well, when you're doing any kind of discovery or investigative work against that, and you produce that email, it's there's no attachment on it, right? And so Nuix takes the next step, right? We go a bit further, and so we'll actually find those attachments. If there's multiple or just one or whatever the case is, we'll actually find those and include those as part of the email. So as part of your investigative work, you'll be able to reconstitute, so to speak, that email with its attachments, and to be able to do all of that from a single pane of glass is pretty powerful. And then, of course, Teams. This is the big one. And public and private chats are all accessible through the connector. You'll be able to see messages that have been edited. You'll be able to leverage any inline images that were included. Emojis, GIFs, and stickers and reactions are all part of the type of metadata that Nuix is able to obtain through that Graph API connector. Meeting conversations are an additional component to it. So there really is a lot that Nuix is able to download and make available to you as part of it. And with that, before we actually dive into a demo, I think we've got a poll here. Is that right, Dana?
That is correct. Okay, so I'm actually going to launch the poll now. And you should be able to, everyone should be able to see it. So we're going to pause at this point. I'm going to turn it over to everyone in the audience. Before Alex moves on to kind of demoing the connector itself, we want to know, what is your biggest challenge when working with Microsoft Teams data in M365? As a caveat, the results are anonymous, and if you have a challenge that isn't listed here, you can feel free to choose other. and let us know, in the question box, what that challenge is, and we can talk about it or mention it as part of the poll results. So the poll options are obtaining the data itself for eDiscovery use, threading chat messages for easy search and review, identifying other attributes such as if the message was edited, inline images, etc., or combining with other data sources outside of M365. Again, you can also just note other. So while we're waiting for those results, we'll give it about a minute. While we're waiting for those results, Alex, we can take a question that came in. So the question is, what are the associated costs for using the M365 connector within Nuix? Alex, if you're there, Alex, you might be.
Apologies. I was stating that was a great question. The way we've built and designed the connector is to really benefit all Nuix users across the board. And so as long as you're running a latest version of Nuix, the connector is just included in the software at no additional cost. So obviously that's a fantastic thing for all of our customers.
That's awesome. Thank you. I'm seeing that we are having a technical issue with the poll. Let's see. I'm going to leave it open and start to. How about if we do this? Well, would you like to move into the demo and we can visit the poll as we figure out this kind of technical issue?
Of course, not a problem. We'll go ahead and do that right now. Dana, just let me know when you can see the screen share come through.
I'm seeing the screen, Alex.
Perfect. All right, everyone. So the way we're going to approach this today is, first and foremost, I want to make sure everyone knows what the connector looks like, how it's leveraged, which part of the ecosystem you can obtain it within. And then we'll actually go look at some of the results that the connector has downloaded, and I will go and actually sort of touch on a couple challenges that I mentioned there and how how Nuix solves those. Okay. So you might have heard me answer that question that came through about which piece of Nuix software. And so the software specifically that we're referencing and what we'll be looking at here today is really any component of the Nuix engine, but most importantly Nuix Workstation. The engine, of course, is supporting this through the APIs, but for most organizations who are going to be looking at augmenting their existing workflow, you're likely be controlling a lot of this through Nuix Workstation. And so on my screen, for those of you familiar with Workstation, you'll know this screen. You've seen this probably thousands of times when you're adding evidence to an existing case. And by simply clicking the Add Evidence button and going to the network location, you'll have a new option down here. And many of you may already have this and you don't know about it, but you'll see an option for Microsoft Office 365. When you click on that, you'll be prompted to enter credentials, which will allow you to authenticate to your tenant. And so I have my saved credentials that I've popped in here, and I can test my connection. And of course, I get a green check mark there. Moving over for a bit, your first instinct will be, okay, well, how do I add users? And we present you really a couple different ways to do this. One of them, which is a bit of a differentiator. And so, of course, the first thing that you can do is come in here and you can add your users. At the moment, you would basically need your email addresses if you're going to be adding it through a UPN or a user principal name. So you would add the email addresses in here. This supports one or multiple entries that is semicolon delimited. And you can click the validate button It'll validate that address exists in your tenant and effectively add it as part of your data that you'll be downloading from 365. A bit of a different way that you can approach this for folks that are looking at this from a Teams perspective is you can actually pass in Teams names. And so if I came in here and added, as an example, a team name called Philly Boys, I can click the validate button. And not only is it going to focus in and scope down to that specific team, but also the users in the team. And so this is actually pretty powerful, because if you know there's a specific team you're looking for, you'll not only capture the data within that team itself, but the individual user data as well. So whether that's Exchange data for those individuals, the private chat data in Teams for those individuals, and you even have the option of leveraging SharePoint as well for those types of things. So that's pretty powerful. So those, again, are the two different ways you could do that. I'll stick with this for now for the demo. And then we have some filters that we can leverage. So for, if you know that you're going to be dealing with Exchange data, of course, you have a little schema of a typical Exchange mailbox. And here you can decide what part of a user's mailbox you want to target. So by default, we're grabbing the current mailbox and online archive if it exists. And we're also grabbing all items in the recoverable items area of the mailbox. Of course, you can decide whether you want to deselect any of those or select anything else. You can then filter by date range. And by default, it'll set the date to the current date you're running the Nuix software on, and it'll go back exactly 1 year at that point. And of course, you can toggle that and change that to whatever you need. And then finally, the version configuration. So you heard me mention versioning for documents. And so this is the default option is to basically grab the latest version. So any of the latest versions of that document will be obtained through the download, but you optionally can grab all versions within the date range you've specified right above here. And you can also optionally limit that to the last, say, 3 versions of that document, or 5 as an example. And so we'll actually look at what that data looks like when it's downloaded, because if you are doing some investigative work and you want to see maybe how the document was modified over a period of time, or what changes were made, or who might have altered that document, you absolutely can do that through this versioning capability here. And going back to the first tab for a second, at the bottom is where you can control what services that you're going to download data from. So by default, Teams and Exchange and SharePoint are all selected, but of course you can deselect things if you need to, if you only want to grab emails, or maybe you just want the private chats. You have control there of how you'd like to do that. So one other thing I'd like to show before we move on is really the flexibility of, before you even initiate the download, you can examine the structure of Microsoft 365 for the selections you've made. And depending on how granular you might need to get, you can make those changes at this point. So if you recall, I added this Philly Boys team. And so if I expand that, I can see the channels within that team. I can also see calendars in there. So again, if there's specific areas of this team that maybe I don't want to collect data from, I can simply deselect those options. Similarly, with users, I can decide if I want their full Exchange mailbox, so I can see the actual schema of their user mailbox and make different selections on what I may want to include or exclude. And the private chats, I'll have the ability to leverage those. And of course, the SharePoint environment as well. I can expand that and make determinations based on which folders in the SharePoint environment I'm looking to download the data from. So that's basically the beginning of how you're going to take data in 365, tell Nuix how to connect to it, and what data sources are most interest of you. And once you've set this up and you hit the OK button here, that's when you're basically committing the download and Nuix will begin downloading that data. Of course, depending on the size and scale of how many custodians you have and what those data sources are, obviously, might take a couple hours based on what you're looking for. From some performance testing that we've seen and feedback from our customers, generally that connector is going to give you in the neighborhood of about half a gig to a gigabyte per hour. But for those of you familiar with Nuix, you'll know that we're all about speed and scale. And so there's various ways to help increase that type of performance to get your data downloaded faster using some of our secret sauce. Okay, so we're now, I'm pivoting now, and I'd like to just quickly show everyone today what the results actually look like and how you can interact with that data once it's been downloaded. So a couple things to call out here real quick. If you notice here in the top left-hand corner under evidence, this is all the data that you saw me add as evidence through that connector. And so I've got my different users, I've got the various different teams that I've downloaded data from, and of course I have the different SharePoint sites that were applicable to this investigation. I've got all of that data downloaded, which means now all of this data is searchable in a single pane of glass. And I want to be clear, the data is searchable using Nuix technology. So as part of the collection/download process into Nuix, Nuix is making its own unique searchable text index and database. And so you're not leveraging Microsoft's in any way. This is all based on the Nuix technology, the Nuix engine, and all the goodness that you've come to know about Nuix with all of its other data sources and how we approach them. And so it's pretty simple in the sense that, if I wanted to come in here, and run some, some data, some key terms or search terms or whatever you'd like, of course, that's going to operate the exact same way. You can do bulk different search and tags. You'll get all your hit highlighting, everything that you would come to expect from those different data sources. But let's actually focus in on those three key things I talked about. So one of them being the search results. Of course, using the search bar here, you'll be able to build very basic or comprehensive different search criteria. So if you wanted to, as an example, import a list of search terms, of course you can do that, and those can be very basic or very comprehensive with wildcards, with fuzzy logic, proximity, all sorts of logical Boolean operators, or however you're going to build that out. This will accept that. The Nuix, searching language is very powerful, very robust, and there's a lot of awesome things that you can do and get those results basically in near real time. So as an example, if I wanted to run these set of searches, you'll see how quickly that runs, gives me my reports, and then basically can tag my items, very similarly. So of course, that's going to give you that search power that may be missing from your workflow today. If we turn our attention to being able to then leverage different data sources, Nuix, of course, supports those thousands of different file types. And so not only with your Microsoft data, but you'll then have the ability to add all sorts of other different data sources, right? I can browse to disk images or logical collections or data from a file share, as an example, or maybe I have other connectors that I'm going to connect to pull data from other different cloud locations, as an example, if those are all pertinent to the the litigation or the investigation. And so you can easily connect to all those different data sources. You can add those additional different custodians from a file share, as an example. You can pull all that data together and search all across it all within a single pane of glass, being Nuix Workstation that we're looking at right here. And really, the other one, of course, is Teams, right? That's going to be the big one. So let's take a look at that a little bit, how Nuix works with that. And with that, we'll also look at things like the version documents and the modern attachments. So if I just reset my view here for a moment, I'll just deselect this to focus on Teams data. And actually, we'll select all of this, and we'll use For those of you familiar with Nuix, you'll know that we now have chat conversations and chat messages as a MIME type. So I can simply toggle those on if I wanted to drill down and only look at the Teams chats. I can validate that because I see here in my file type column, Teams channel messages and conversations. I can see various different attributes about it, including the conversation ID. This is very powerful to enable to enable threading of those messages. So if you wanted to see all the messages within a conversation, you can leverage this feature to basically look at all of those. And Nuix is going to parse all of those things automatically for you. All of these messages that you see right here are all bubbled up to a single conversation that Nuix is creating. You'll be able to see attachments, any other components that were leveraged within that. And of course, as you see here, if I scroll over, you can see reactions to different messages that might have been sent, the like, the heart, the laugh, etc. In a moment, I'm actually going to pivot over to Nuix Investigate, which is our web application that will take this to a whole new level as it relates to reviewing the chat messages, looking at the threads, seeing who's involved, and seeing some of this in a more sort of graphical friendly view. But before I get to that, I just want to call out a couple more things. So if we look at the chat messages, I just want to show everyone, Nuix captures all of it. We've got the dates, who sent it, who received it, the text, all of that information. It's all here. And of course, when we move to that web application, Nuix Investigate, we're going to see all of those things really laid out in a nice bubble view. But for the practitioner who's looking to do that sort of quick, pragmatic approach, this is a great way to interact with that data. I also want to cover very quickly the versions. We talked about versionings, and I see some questions coming in for that, which I'll address half here and then half after the demo concludes. But I want to show you guys versioning. And so I've built some canned search macros here, which will basically load and find all of the different versioned items for me. And we have queries and flags and various different things here where we can actually see the different versions of these items. And so this query I ran is finding all items that have some type of version attribute associated with them. If I scroll here to the right, I can reveal what those version attributes are. Or if I wanted to really kind of dive into it from a different perspective, I can look at the full metadata on this item. And at the bottom, I can reveal the similar type of metadata. How the version age, which basically indicates the value, and where it might exist within sort of that broad spectrum of versions that you've captured. So that's all the versions. If I wanted to look at all of the older versions, so not the latest ones, but all the different variations of a document or a PowerPoint, I can also run my flag for that and take a look at the different versions that might exist there. And of course, all that metadata is captured. And if we also similarly have a flag for all current versions, so the latest versions of the documents. We've also done some interesting things here with the naming scheme. So you absolutely can see the different versions just by looking at a name. As an example, this personal drive document _1.0, _2.0, right? That represents the older versions of the documents. So as you're doing, as you're conducting your investigation or your review, you can look at these things and make determinations off the documents and maybe spin off and kind of go down, a different path if you find something interesting with that version doc. Okay, last thing I want to touch on here in Workstation is the modern attachments. And I just want to show you an example where here's 3 different emails. And I'm sure this looks very familiar to most of you, where you might have, downloaded an email, or you've got an email in your PST that contains the URLs basically to these documents. And then if you notice here on the right, we've got a family tab. And within that family tab, we now have those docs. So by default, in native tools, you're simply just going to get content, no attachments. But with the Nuix connector, we take that extra step, we go that extra mile, and we'll go and reconstitute those docs and include them as part of the actual family. So of course, like anything else, you can come in here, search it, analyze it, look at the metadata, export it out, whatever you need to do, those capabilities will be built within that. So I'm going to pause here for a second, and I'm going to turn everyone's attention now over to Nuix Investigate. So where Nuix Workstation is a bit more of the practitioner's tool, or those folks who are going to be starting the investigation or the discovery process of gathering all the data and readying it. Nuix Investigate, while can be used by technical users, it really is geared as well for the business users. The folks who are need to make some determinations or validate some of the data or make some decisions on whether this data needs to be hosted in a review tool, as an example, or not, right? So you can do a lot of that first pass review. You can do a lot of those early case assessments right here within Nuix Investigate. And I'm not going to dive into every single sort of feature within here, but I want to focus on some of the core capabilities that Investigate can be used to really augment your typical workflow and give you a whole slew of other possibilities when it comes to the Teams data, when it comes to these modern attachments, when it comes to actually visually seeing who might be talking to who in your conversations. So the first thing I just want to start at, I want to talk about the emails with modern attachments. So I'm going to bring those up again for a moment, because I want to show you within Nuix Investigate, you have a little bit more of a more sort of business-friendly review as it comes to looking at the data. So when I select my messages here, I not only kind of get that raw text view, but I optionally, when I'm browsing the documents, I can look at the near native version of that item. So Nuix Investigate connects to a Microsoft Office online server, and you'll actually be able to render that native directly within the web app without ever having to download the data external to the tool, or cracking open a PST and trying to find the attachment. It's all within here. And so all as part of your investigation, as you're going through here, you're running your searches, you're looking at some of the emails that have been flagged. You can come in here, cycle through these documents, whether they're Excel spreadsheets, whether they're PowerPoints, docs, emails. You'll be able to see that near native view of it. Of course, with the raw view, if you're going to be looking at search terms and hit counts and things of that nature. So again, pretty powerful when you think about how this can be leveraged as part of your workflow. And again, not only just with the Microsoft 365 data, but as you expand that out to combining that with all sorts of other data types that might be pertinent to the legal matter that you might be involved in. Let's now switch back to our Teams data, because I want to show you really two very powerful things here that I absolutely love, and many of my customers have adopted these capabilities and are starting to incorporate them into their existing workflows. So if we go back to my filters here, we'll reset this, and we'll just take a look at some notable chats that I've gone in and tagged. And these are all the same chats, by the way. This is exactly the same thing I showed you, a moment ago in Nuix Workstation. The difference here is the way we present it and the way that they can be viewed within Investigate. And so by simply clicking on a chat here, of course, you now have a more graphical representation of that complete conversation. So I can come in here, and within Nuix Investigate, I can not only see who all the participants were, I can see all of the chats in the exact chronological order that they've occurred. Of course, when I run searches and I'm looking at hit highlighting, those will all be factored into this as well. I can isolate specific parties within the conversation and focus in on specific areas. So again, really powerful and really takes this to the next level. When you look at special characters or emojis and things like that, those will also get relayed through. And of course, attachments, very similar to what I just showed you a moment ago. I can look at the family of this conversation which shows me all of the individual chats. But if we look here, say at this national scale LE, I can I can actually toggle through that PowerPoint and then look at that near native version of that as well. Again, really kind of making that whole review process just more seamless, more straightforward, and again, really more user-friendly when you think about it. Okay, when it comes back to the Teams data itself, I want to show you one other really powerful visualization that can go a long way when it comes to trying to reduce the amount of time to what you're looking for. Seeing who's talking to who, doing some basic, high-level link analysis, right? So if I select these items, and again, these items are all conversations that contain the chat messages that we were just looking at, I can simply right-click and select Investigate Connections. And Nuix is going to automatically take those different items and basically put them on this canvas that I'm looking at here. And now I can start seeing the relationships between the different Teams channels, between the users that were chatting with each other. And of course, the thicker the line, the more communications there are between those different individuals or parties. You can break out into individual teams. What's really nice about this type of thing, that this type of visualization, is as I click on these connections, Nuix is automatically finding and presenting to me all of those individual chats that these two users had with, or at least that test one effectively sent test two. All right, and so I can come in here, and if I wanted to, specifically look at these, I can isolate those out and actually look at the full thread and where specifically in that thread that message came from. So again, very powerful stuff. Adds a whole new dimension to your investigation or review process, and really helps cut that time, increase efficiencies, and potentially reduce costs when you're really looking for those key messages or key different artifacts. And the great thing about this is this not only works on just Teams data, this also works on any other communication-based data. So it could be emails, potentially logs, chat messages, phone text messages if you're capturing a forensic image of a corporate device, like an iPad or an iPhone as an example. So really powerful stuff when you think about how you can really take that Teams data and not only present it in this visual aspect, but then layer it in with other communication-based data. And so with that, I would like to, go back to really one more slide here to just talk about the Nuix engine and really, how the platform, the combination of our platform and our entire ecosystem really helps customers know and act really the moment something happens, and how our different tools within the ecosystem can help contribute to solving all of these problems. Whether it's monitoring endpoints or collecting the data, or with Nuix Workstation, right, beginning that investigation. In Nuix Investigate, as we just saw, finding connections and building intelligence, or with Nuix Discover, taking all of that data and readying it for litigation. And of course, our APIs and SDK underpin this entire end-to-end ecosystem. So some very powerful stuff there. I've been at Nuix for almost 8 years now. The technology is fantastic, and it's amazing how we continue to evolve and solve all these data challenges, and really, help our customers across the world, do some really awesome stuff.
Thank you, Alex. That was amazing. We have a lot of questions. Many are related, I think, to your demo. And so I'm just going to give the quick, heads up that we will be doing a separate follow-up because I don't think we're going to get to, with just about 9 minutes left, we're not going to get to all of the questions here. So we'll be doing a separate follow-up to everyone who has registered and everyone who's viewing right now. And then we'll also figure out a way to get that poll to you and the results of that poll. So I'm gonna go with you, Alex. How would you like to? What questions would you like to tackle here in our remaining time?
Yeah, I'm sorting through these. There certainly are a lot of them. I guess I'll attempt to go in chronological order from first sent to now.
Okay.
So I'm kind of going towards the bottom right here. So included in which Nuix software, the connector is part of Nuix Workstation, and there's a couple different ways that you can leverage it, but the physical GUI part of the connector is Nuix Workstation. It is available in the APIs, so that you'll definitely have ways of potentially scripting that if need be. So I guess we can mark that one as answered.
Wonderful.
Okay, next one. We have Nuix Investigate, and we'll have Nuix Discover soon. My background is forensics, so we need to have a connector to pull the data. What is that exactly? And Azure deployment tied into Microsoft 365 directly? Great question. So our connector is built on the Microsoft's Graph API, which will connect to your tenant. There's a couple prerequisites, which we didn't really talk about on the call today, but as part of setting up for it, we have a fully comprehensive user guide that gives you all the details on the type of account you need, what kind of permissions you'll need within the tenant. And so that account's created on the Azure side. It's an application account. And once that's created with the right permissions, that will then give your users the ability to connect and leverage that connector and then have that data within Investigate.
Thanks, Alex. I'm going to mark that one as answered.
Okay.
Do you want to keep going chronologically?
Yeah, let's do this. I see modern attachments specifically under OneDrive and SharePoint. This would also be working within the Teams data. If there's a link, will the connector pull that file in if it can reach it? I do believe the answer to that one is yes. We'll certainly get some confirmation on that, but yes, I do believe the answer to that is yes.
The next one is, if we put a name of a custodian, can we check what channels and Teams this custodian is a participant of?
Yes. Yeah. So you can do that with the GUI that we demonstrated today. Yep.
Can we ingest PST exports from M365?
We can, with a bit of a caveat to that today. So we can ingest PST exports from Microsoft 365. We are working on the Teams aspect of that. So any Teams data in the PST will be normalized by Nuix, but you're not necessarily going to be able to do all of the fancy, threading and those kinds of things today. But our product and engineering teams are working on that capability for the near future.
Awesome, thank you. Next is, what kind of privileges do we need to connect the custodians to the custodians M365?
Similar to the prior question about that, there's about 10 or 12 different permissions that would need to be applied to the application ID account that's created. We can follow up with that one offline. We can send you the link to the documentation.
I think where is the data, or what is the data to be stored by Nuix once selected?
Yes, that's a great question. So using the connector, the data would be stored within the Nuix case. And so you can optionally choose to store the binaries within the Nuix case during the download. So that way, when you need to reference or export, whether that's single item exports or bulk exports, you'd be able to reference the binaries. But that's all stored within the Nuix case.
Then we have, does the speed of download depend on the number of workers?
It does. It does. Yes. You can leverage multiple Nuix workers to help with the performance. There is a limit though with the API and the throughput and those kinds of things. We can add more detail or color around that offline as well.
Absolutely. I think we can let's do this one more, and then we'll do a wrap up. And again, we'll make sure that everyone who has attended today will get these answers kind of fleshed out, and we will get to all of the questions in a follow-up communication. So the last one we'll do is, how does Nuix locate a user's team site?
So that's actually all part of the Graph API that we leverage. So by putting in either if you're starting with the team's name, or whether you're going with the user accounts, the UPN, Nuix will basically query the Graph API in the background and find all of the associated data services based on the selections you've made in the GUI.
Wonderful. Okay, so with that, we'll move to wrap up here. Before we do, I want to just let everyone know that coming up next is Nuix's participation in Legal Week. It's actually Legal Year this year due to the number of events that will be going on tied into Legal Week. We will be attending the first session, which is February 2nd to the 4th. And if you are attending, you can check out our session. It's a thought leadership educational session, Pandemic and eDiscovery, how COVID-19 is pushing corporate legal teams to innovate. We will have speakers including Allison Stanton from Facebook, Tracy Ann Egan from Common Spirit Health, Toby Stinson from Chevron, as well as Ari Kaplan, and Emily Tice, our Vice President of Customer Experience here at Nuix, will be the moderator. And basically the topic for the discussion is how the normal legal in-house teams working on eDiscovery, the processing to production workflows have kind of changed and been influenced in the wake of COVID-19. And the legal teams are finding themselves increasingly responsible for monitoring and the collection of data from news sources such as M365, the topic of this webinar. And so you can listen to how the teams at Facebook, Chevron, and Common Spirit are kind of examining and approaching eDiscovery in a new light to adjust to these realities. So we hope you can join us at that session if you will be at Legal Week from February 2nd to the 4th. And on that note, again, we will be sending some follow-up. Thank you so much for your amazing response and all of your questions. Alex, thank you for your time and your expertise.
Thank you, Dana. It was a pleasure. Thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you. We'll see you all soon.